The stars looked different when Captain John Martinez stepped onto the bridge of the UE's Discovery that morning. For 300 years, humanity had dreamed of this moment. First contact with an alien civilization. The year was 2387, and humans had spread across 17 star systems, building colonies on distant worlds and mining asteroids for resources. But they had always been alone in the dark void of space. That changed when the long-range sensors picked up something impossible. A massive structure floating in the empty space between star systems. It was artificial, clearly built by intelligent beings. The structure was bigger than Earth's moon and covered in lights that pulsed in patterns too complex to be natural. When the Discovery approached, smaller ships emerged from the structure like bees from a hive. John felt his heart racing as he watched the alien vessels on the main screen. They were beautiful in a way that human ships could never match. Their hulls seemed to shift color like oil on water, and they moved with a grace that defied physics. The lead ship was sending signals in mathematical patterns that humanity's computers could barely understand. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stood beside John on the bridge. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Elena spoke 12 human languages and had studied every theory about alien communication that scientists had ever written. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the translation protocols. That would try to make sense of the alien signals. The first message came through after 6 hours of careful work. The words appeared on screens throughout the ship in simple English. Welcome to Confederation space. You will follow our escort to Nexus Prime for processing. Do not deviate from the assigned course, or you will be destroyed. John looked at Elena with confusion. Processing. The word felt cold and unwelcoming. This was not how humanity had imagined first contact would happen. They had expected wonder, curiosity, maybe even fear from the aliens. Instead, they were being treated like cargo. That needed to be sorted and cataloged. The journey to Nexus Prime took 8 days. The Discovery followed a convoy of alien ships through hyperspace corridors that human technology could barely detect. When they emerged near their destination, John gasped at what he saw through the viewports. Nexus Prime was not a planet. It was an artificial world built from metal and crystal, spinning slowly in space. The structure was so massive that it had its own weather systems. Clouds drifted between towering spires that stretched into space, and oceans of liquid covered vast sections of the surface. Thousands of ships moved in organized patterns around Nexus Prime. John could see dozens of different designs, each one clearly from a different species. Some ships looked like living creatures with organic curves and pulsing lights. Others were geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. The diversity was overwhelming and beautiful. The Discovery was guided to a docking bay that could have held 100 ships the size of Earth's largest space stations. As they landed, John saw their first aliens through the bay windows. Tall beings with blue skin and 4 arms were directing traffic with gestures that seemed to flow like water. Smaller creatures that looked like walking crystals were scanning. Each arriving ship with devices that hummed with energy. Elena prepared for the diplomatic meeting with careful precision. She wore humanity's finest formal clothes and carried gifts that represented the best of human culture. Art, music, literature, and scientific discoveries were all stored in data crystals that could be read by any advanced civilization. Elena had practiced her opening speech 1,000 times, but now the words felt inadequate. The meeting chamber was larger than any building on Earth. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top, and the walls were covered in displays showing star maps of the entire galaxy. 43 different alien species had representatives in the chamber. John had never imagined that so many different forms of life could exist. At the center of the chamber sat the Galactic Confederation. Council, The leader was a Zephyrian named High Chancellor Vexstar. He was 3 meters tall with silver skin that reflected light like a mirror. His eyes were completely black, and when he spoke, his voice echoed with harmonic overtones that made human teeth ache. Beside him sat representatives of the Vorthen Collective. They looked like living crystals that shifted between different colors as they communicated through patterns of light. Elena approached the council with slow, careful steps. She bowed in the universal gesture of respect that humanity had developed for this moment. When she spoke, her words were translated instantly into dozens of alien languages by the chamber systems. We come in peace from the planet Earth. Humanity offers friendship and cooperation to all species in the galaxy. We have much to learn from you, and we hope we have something to offer in return. We seek only the right to exist peacefully among the stars, and to build a future where all intelligent life can thrive together. High Chancellor Vexstar listened to the translation with what looked like amusement. His response came quickly and without any warmth. Humanity is a young species that has barely learned to leave its home system. You have established colonies on 17 worlds without permission from the Confederation. These worlds exist in space that has been managed by advanced civilizations for over 2,000 years. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had not expected the aliens to know so much about human expansion, and she definitely had not expected them to claim ownership of empty star systems. The colonies were built on uninhabited worlds around stars with no signs of intelligent life. Humanity had been careful to avoid any systems that showed evidence of alien presence. The Chancellor continued speaking with growing authority. The Confederation has decided that humanity lacks the wisdom and experience necessary to govern worlds beyond your birth planet. You will abandon all colonies outside the Sol system within one solar cycle. Your species will remain confined to Earth and its immediate neighbors until you have proven your ability to exist peacefully under Confederation guidance. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Abandon the colonies. 17 worlds that humanity had spent decades terraforming and building. Millions of people who had made new lives among the stars. Families who had been born on distant planets and knew no other home. The Chancellor was demanding that humanity give up everything they had worked for and accept imprisonment in their own solar system. Elena tried to maintain her diplomatic composure, but anger was building in her chest. She thought of the children playing in the gardens of New Haven, the scientists making breakthrough discoveries on Terra Nova, the miners who had spent their lives extracting resources from the asteroid belts of distant systems. All of it would be lost if humanity accepted this ultimatum. Commander Lisa Brooks stood in the observation area above the main chamber. She was Earth's military liaison, and her job was to assess threats to human security. What she was hearing made every instinct scream danger. The aliens were not interested in cooperation or peaceful coexistence. They saw humanity as a problem to be solved, not as equals to be welcomed. Lisa activated her personal recorder and began documenting everything she saw and heard. If this meeting went badly, Earth would need detailed intelligence about Confederation capabilities and intentions. She watched the alien representatives carefully, noting their body language and the way they interacted with each other. The Zephyrians clearly dominated the council, but the crystal beings seemed to provide technical expertise. Other species appeared to be junior partners, or possibly conquered peoples who had been absorbed into the Confederation. Elena made one final attempt at diplomacy. She spoke with passion about humanity's desire for peace and their willingness to work within any reasonable framework for galactic cooperation. She offered to share human technology and culture with the Confederation. She proposed joint exploration missions and scientific exchanges. She painted a vision of the galaxy where different species could learn from each other and grow together. High Chancellor Vexstar responded with contempt that was obvious even across species barriers. Your offers are meaningless. Primitive species always believe they have something valuable to contribute, but advanced civilizations have no need for your crude technology or barbaric culture. The Confederation has maintained order in this galaxy for millennia. We will not allow upstart species to disrupt the natural hierarchy that has brought peace and stability to hundreds of worlds. The meeting ended with a formal declaration that Elena recorded in the Galactic Archives. Her voice was steady, despite the fear and anger she felt inside. We came in peace, seeking cooperation and mutual growth. We have offered our knowledge, our culture, and our friendship. If you choose the path of aggression against peaceful human settlements, know that you have been warned. We will defend ourselves by any means necessary. The Alien Council laughed at what they heard as an empty threat from a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. High Chancellor Vextar dismissed the humans with a wave of his forearms. Return to your primitive world and convince your leaders to accept reality. The Confederation's patience is not infinite, and our methods of enforcement are beyond your comprehension. As the Discovery departed from Nexus Prime, John, Elena stood together on the bridge and watched. 6 months passed after the meeting at Nexus Prime, and the galaxy held its breath. The Confederation expected humanity to quietly abandon their colonies and retreat to Earth like beaten dogs. Instead, human ships continued their regular supply, runs to the 17 worlds. Families kept living their lives on distant planets. Children kept playing in alien sunshine while their parents worked to build better futures. Dr. Patricia Coleman woke up early on Kepler 442b to check her research stations. The planet was humanity's most successful agricultural colony, with vast fields of modified earth crops growing under an orange sun. Patricia had spent 5 years developing new strains of wheat and corn that could thrive in the alien soil. Her work fed 3 million people across the human colonies. The morning started like any other day. Patricia walked through the research compound, checking on her team of 300 scientists and support staff. They were good people who had left comfortable lives on Earth to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Many had brought their families to this distant world. Children laughed and played in the settlement's parks, while their parents worked to understand how life could adapt to alien environments. The attack came without warning. Confederation ships dropped out of hyperspace above Kepler 442b at exactly noon local time. The alien vessels were nothing like the graceful ships that had escorted humanity to Nexus Prime. These were warships, brutal and efficient, designed for only one purpose. They began firing immediately on the research stations and agricultural centers below. Patricia watched in horror from her laboratory window as beams of energy carved through the settlement like knives through paper. The children's park, where she had eaten lunch yesterday, was now a crater of smoking glass. The housing complex where her friend Maria lived with her twin daughters disappeared in a flash of light that burned after images into Patricia's vision. The Confederation forces made no attempt to capture prisoners or salvage valuable research. They systematically destroyed everything humanity had built on Kepler 442b. When Patricia tried to broadcast a surrender message, the alien ships ignored her completely. This was not a military operation. It was extermination. Patricia died alone with everyone else in the research compound when the final bombardment turned the entire settlement into molten rock. The last transmission from Kepler 442b was an automated distress signal that played the same message over and over. 300 civilians killed, no military targets present. This is genocide. News of the massacre reached Earth 12 hours later through quantum communication relays. Admiral Kevin Thompson was in his office at Fleet Command when the reports started coming in. Kevin had served in the military for 30 years, but nothing had prepared him for this. The aliens had murdered an entire research colony without provocation or warning. More attacks followed within days. The mining colony on Titan 7 was hit by Vorthan crystal ships that turned the asteroid processing facilities into clouds of superheated gas. The small farming settlement on Ross 128b was sterilized from orbit by weapons that left the planet uninhabitable for centuries. Every attack followed the same pattern. No communication, no demands for surrender, just swift and total destruction. The Confederation was calling it pest control. High Chancellor Vexstar broadcast a message across subspace declaring that humanity's expansion into Confederation space was a disease that required immediate treatment. The alien leaders spoke about eliminating the human infestation before it could spread further and contaminate civilized worlds. Kevin mobilized every ship in Earth's fleet, but the numbers were terrifying. Humanity had maybe 2,000 combat vessels spread across 17 star systems. The Confederation had been building warships for over 2 millennia and could field fleets of hundreds of thousands. Human technology was advanced, but it could not overcome such massive numerical disadvantage. The battles that followed were heroic and hopeless. Captain Daniel Murphy led a squadron of destroyers in a desperate defense of the colony on New Sparta. His ships fought with courage that impressed even the alien commanders, but courage could not stop the inevitable. New Sparta fell after a 3-day siege that left the planet burning from pole to pole. Commander Rebecca Hayes took her cruiser squadron into the Vorthan supply lines, hoping to slow their advance by destroying logistics ships. Her raids were successful, but ultimately meaningless. For every alien ship that humanity destroyed, 10 more appeared to take its place. The Confederation had industrial capacity that spanned hundreds of worlds. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Parker coordinated the evacuation of New Geneva when Zephyrian forces surrounded the system. His transport ships managed to save 60,000 civilians before the planet was lost, but 200,000 others died in the bombardment that followed. Stephen watched from space as the cities where those people had lived and worked were erased from existence. President Catherine Lewis addressed the United Nations emergency session from the bunker beneath Geneva. The world's leaders had gathered to decide humanity's response to what was clearly a war of extermination. Catherine had hoped to be remembered as the president who led humanity to the stars. Instead, she was watching their dream of galactic civilization die in nuclear fire. Debate was brief and bitter. Some representatives argued for immediate surrender, hoping that the aliens might show mercy if humanity gave up all claims to worlds beyond Earth. Others demanded that the fleet fight to the last ship in defense of human colonies. A few suggested that Earth should negotiate with other alien species who might be willing to protect humanity from Confederation aggression. Catherine listened to the arguments with growing despair. Every option seemed to lead to the same outcome. Humanity would lose their colonies, their freedom, and possibly their lives. The Confederation had made it clear that they viewed humans as inferior beings who had no right to exist among the stars. Final diplomatic attempt came when Catherine herself recorded a message for broadcast across the galaxy. She spoke directly to the alien civilizations that watched the genocide unfold. We extend this last offer of peace. Withdraw your forces from human space, and we will forget these transgressions. Continue this path of genocide, and you will face consequences beyond your comprehension. Humanity possesses weapons we have never used, weapons we hoped never to deploy. This is your final warning. The Confederation's response was swift and brutal. High Chancellor Vexstar ordered a massive assault on humanity's crown jewel colony. New Earth was the most successful human settlement outside the Sol system. 4 million people lived on the planet in cities that rivaled anything on Earth itself. The world had oceans and forests and mountains where human children had been born under alien stars. General Marcus Wright commanded the orbital defense platforms around New Earth. His forces included the most advanced ships in the human fleet and weapon systems that could destroy entire fleets. Marcus had spent his career preparing for this kind of battle, but he had never imagined fighting against odds of 1,000 to 1. The siege of New Earth lasted 6 days. Marcus and his defenders fought with desperate courage, destroying hundreds of alien ships and proving that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. But the Confederation kept sending more fleets until the defense platforms were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The evacuation saved 2 million people, but 2 million others could not escape in time. Marcus stayed at his command post until the end, coordinating the final transport ships while Confederation forces closed in around him. His last transmission was a simple message. Tell Earth that we made them pay for every inch. New Earth burned for weeks after the battle ended. The Confederation forces broadcast their victory across subspace, declaring that humanity's resistance was broken and their extinction was now inevitable. High Chancellor Vexstar's message echoed through space with arrogant certainty. Let this be a lesson to any species that dares challenge the natural order. Humanity's time ends now. The message reached Earth just as Dr. Amanda Foster was walking through the snow to her laboratory, hidden beneath the Antarctic ice. Amanda had spent 20 years working on projects so classified that only a handful of people knew they existed. She had hoped never to use the weapons her team had created. But as she watched the footage of New Earth burning, Amanda realized that hope was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Amanda descended into the facility that housed Project Prometheus, the most secret program in human history. The laboratory stretched for kilometers through tunnels carved from solid rock. Thousands of scientists and engineers had worked here in absolute secrecy, preparing for the day when humanity might face extinction. That day had finally come. The activation codes for Protocol Omega required authorization from the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Chief of Naval Operations. Amanda already had 2 of the 3 codes. She sent an encrypted message to Catherine Lewis requesting the final authorization. The response came back within minutes. Execute Protocol Omega. God help us all. Amanda's hands shook as she entered the activation sequence. Around her, automated systems began awakening technologies that had never been tested outside of computer simulations. In hidden facilities across Earth and its colonies, weapons that defied conventional understanding of warfare prepared for deployment. Galaxy learned what human desperation could create when Dr. Amanda Foster pressed the activation button in her Antarctic laboratory. 300 years of secret preparation unleashed itself across space in ways that no alien civilization had ever imagined. Humanity had spent centuries building their colonies and exploring the stars, but they had also been preparing for the worst possible outcome. That preparation was about to reshape the galaxy forever. The first Confederation world to pay the price was the Zephyrian military stronghold of Keth Morin. Admiral Corvan commanded the orbital defense platforms that protected the system where the attacks on human colonies had been planned. His fleet of 5,000 warships represented the finest military technology that the Zephyrians had developed. Over 2 millennia of conquest, Corvan was reviewing battle reports from the destruction of New Earth when his sensors detected something impossible. The asteroid belt around Keth Morin's star was moving, not drifting in its normal orbital pattern, but actively reshaping itself into geometric formations that defied natural physics. Individual asteroids were breaking apart and reforming into structures that pulsed with energy. The Admiral ordered his science teams to investigate, but their reports made no sense. The asteroids were not just moving, they were transforming at the molecular level. Rock and metal were being converted into something else entirely. Something that appeared to be alive and intelligent and completely hostile to anything made by the Confederation. Within 6 hours, every asteroid in the system had become part of a vast swarm of machines smaller than bacteria, but collectively more powerful than entire star fleets. The nanoscale devices worked together with perfect coordination, consuming matter and converting it into more machines. They spread through space like a virus, but a virus designed by engineers who understood the fundamental forces of reality. Corvin watched in growing horror as his defensive platforms were engulfed by clouds of microscopic machines. The swarms did not attack with conventional weapons. Instead, they simply touched the hull of each ship and began the process of conversion. Metal became more machines. Electronics became processing units for the growing intelligence. Living beings became raw materials for construction projects beyond comprehension. The admiral tried to evacuate his fleets, but the machines moved faster than any ship could travel. They spread through hyperspace itself, following the quantum signatures that connected all matter in the universe. Corvin's flagship was consumed while he watched other ships dissolving around him. The last thing he saw was his own hands beginning to sparkle as nanomachines converted his body into computational substrate. The Kethmoran system became a monument to human engineering within 18 hours. Where planets and moons had once orbited the star, there were now vast geometric structures that pulsed with artificial intelligence. The machines had consumed everything in the system and converted it into a single massive computer that broadcast one message across subspace on every frequency. You were warned. Dr. Nathan Clark monitored the nanomachine deployment from his command center buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. Nathan had spent his entire career developing technologies that could reshape matter at the atomic level. His work had been inspired by the simple question of what would happen if humanity ever faced extinction and needed to fight with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. The nanomachines were just the beginning. Nathan activated the gravity bomb project that his colleague Maria Santos had perfected in laboratories hidden throughout the solar system. These weapons did not simply destroy targets. They created localized distortions in space-time itself that made normal physics stop working in predictable ways. Colonel Rebecca Hayes commanded the stealth ship UE as retribution as it approached the Vorthan Collective's core systems. The crystal beings had provided the industrial capacity for the Confederation's genocide against humanity. Their worlds were massive computational matrices where billions of crystalline entities processed information at speeds that organic minds could never match. Rebecca's mission was to deploy gravity bombs near the 3 most important Vorthan worlds. The weapons were small devices that looked like metallic spheres, but each one contained compressed matter from the cores of neutron stars. When activated, they would create gravitational anomalies that would tear apart the fabric of reality in ways that could never be repaired. The first bomb detonated near Vorth Prime just as the crystal beings were celebrating their victory over human colonies. The weapon created a zone where gravity flowed backward and time moved in loops. Ships approaching the planet found themselves pulled into the past, experiencing their own destruction before they even arrived. The Vorthan entities that tried to escape discovered that causality itself had become unreliable. The second bomb turned the moon of Vorth Secondary into a region where the strong nuclear force stopped working. Atoms simply fell apart, releasing energy in patterns that created permanent tears in space. The crystal beings watched in terror as their carefully ordered reality became chaos, where the laws of physics changed from moment to moment. Rebecca watched the effects of the gravity bombs through sensors that barely functioned near the distorted space-time. The Vorthan systems were not destroyed in any conventional sense. They had been transformed into regions where reality itself was broken. Ships that entered these areas experienced impossible things. Time flowed backward, gravity pushed instead of pulled, and matter forgot how to exist in stable forms. Captain Daniel Murphy led Squadron 7 in the deployment of temporal displacement weapons against Confederation fleets throughout the galaxy. These devices trapped enemy ships in time loops, where crews experienced their deaths over and over without ever actually dying. The psychological warfare effects were devastating as word spread through alien forces about comrades. Trapped in infinite cycles of terror, Daniel's squadron appeared without warning near a Zephyrian battle fleet that was preparing to attack the human colony on Proxima Centauri. The temporal weapons looked like simple missiles, but they carried technology that manipulated the flow of time itself. When they detonated near enemy ships, the crews found themselves reliving the same moment of destruction for eternity. The trapped Zephyrian crews broadcast their experiences across subspace communication networks. They described watching their ships explode again and again while remaining conscious throughout each death. They begged for help that could never come because they were no longer existing in normal time. Their screams echoed through space as a warning to other Confederation forces about what humanity had become. Dr. Jennifer Cole's Biological Warfare Division released engineered viruses that had been designed specifically to target the genetic structures of each alien species involved in the genocide. These pathogens were masterpieces of synthetic biology that lay dormant for weeks before activating simultaneously across hundreds of worlds. Jennifer had spent decades studying samples of alien DNA gathered by human exploration missions. Her viruses were designed to be absolutely specific, affecting only the species that had participated in attacking human colonies. The diseases caused systematic organ failure that was painful but not immediately fatal, giving victims time to understand what was happening to them and why. The biological weapons spread through Confederation space like wildfire. Zephyrian military commanders found themselves dying slowly while their bodies shut down system by system. Vorthan crystal entities discovered that their crystalline structures were dissolving from within as the viruses attacked the quantum processes that held their bodies together. Most terrifying of all was the precision of the attacks. Only species that had directly participated in the genocide were affected. Civilian populations that had opposed the war remained completely healthy, forced to watch their military leaders die in agony while understanding exactly why this was happening to them. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Parker coordinated the consciousness transfer weapons from a facility hidden in the asteroid belt. These devices could capture the minds of enemy combatants and trap them in virtual reality prisons where they experienced the terror and pain that human colonists had felt during the initial attacks. Stephen's team had recorded the final moments of every human civilian killed by Confederation forces. The virtual prisons forced alien prisoners to live through these experiences from the perspective of the victims. Zephyrian admirals found themselves dying as human children while their families burned around them. Vorthan commanders experienced the helplessness of researchers watching their life's work destroyed by orbital bombardment. The psychological trauma spread through surviving alien populations as released prisoners shared their experiences. Entire civilizations developed collective guilt disorders as they confronted the reality of what they had done to innocent human families. Military recruitment collapsed as potential soldiers learned what capture by human forces actually meant. Engineer Carlos Rodriguez perfected the stellar manipulation technology that allowed humanity to turn entire stars into precision weapons. The Zephyrian home system watched in terror as their sun began to fluctuate according to human karma. The Galactic Confederation learned the true meaning of human warfare when their most advanced civilizations began to collapse under the weight of impossible technologies. What had started as a simple extermination campaign against primitive humans had become a nightmare. It spread across hundreds of star systems. The aliens discovered too late that humanity operated by rules of conflict that no other species had ever imagined. High Chancellor Vexstar stood in his command center on Nexus, prime, and watched reports of impossible defeats flowing in from across Confederation space. His military advisors could not explain how human weapons worked or how to defend against them. The nanomachine swarms consumed entire fleets and converted them into monuments of warning. The gravity bombs created regions where reality itself had been broken beyond repair. The Chancellor had ruled the Confederation for 3 centuries and had never faced an enemy that fought like humans did. Other species used conventional weapons that could be understood and countered. They followed predictable patterns of military doctrine that had been refined over millennia of galactic warfare. Humans seemed to fight with the fundamental forces of the universe itself as their weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Parker monitored the deployment of psychological warfare systems from his command ship in the Outer Rim. Stephen had been studying alien psychology for 20 years, learning how different species processed fear and trauma. His team had developed consciousness transfer weapons that trapped enemy minds in virtual reality prisons designed specifically for each alien species. The Zephyrians, with their silver skin and harmonic voices, experienced human memories through synthetic bodies that felt every sensation of terror and pain. Captured Zephyrian admirals found themselves reliving the final moments of human children as Confederation bombs fell on their schools. They felt the helplessness of parents watching their families die while being unable to protect them. The Vorthan crystal beings faced a different kind of torture in Stephen's virtual prisons. Their crystalline minds were forced to experience organic death, feeling their bodies dissolve and decay in ways that their species had never evolved to understand. They lived through the memories of human scientists watching years of research burn as alien ships sterilized their laboratories. Stephen's psychological warfare had effects that spread far beyond the captured prisoners. When the aliens were eventually released, they returned to their home worlds carrying trauma that infected entire populations. Zephyrian society began to develop collective guilt disorders as released prisoners shared their experiences of dying as human civilians. Military recruitment collapsed as potential soldiers learned what capture by human forces actually meant. Engineer Carlos Rodriguez worked from a hidden facility in the asteroid belt to perfect humanity's stellar manipulation technology. Carlos could reach across interstellar distances and touch the hearts of alien suns with invisible forces that made stars themselves into weapons of precision warfare. The Zephyrian home system had become a demonstration of what happened when humans decided to show their true capabilities. The star that had warmed Zephyrian civilization for thousands of years now danced to human commands. Carlos could make it burn hotter or cooler at will, creating solar flares that erupted with surgical precision to destroy military installations while leaving civilian areas untouched. The psychological impact was devastating as entire populations watched their sun betray them under human control. The Zephyrian government tried to evacuate their military assets to other star systems, but Carlos followed them with his stellar weapons. Every sun in Confederation space could become a tool of human warfare. Solar storms disabled electronics across military bases, while civilian cities remained protected by Carlos's careful targeting. The message was clear that humanity could destroy everything but chose to show restraint that their enemies had never offered. Dr. Michelle Adams led the reality warping projects from laboratories hidden throughout human space. Michelle had spent her career studying the fundamental constants that held the universe together and learning how to change them in localized regions. Her weapons attacked physics itself, creating zones where the normal rules of reality stopped working. Confederation fleets entering Michelle's reality distortion fields found themselves in regions where time flowed backward, forcing them to experience their defeats before their battles even began. In some zones, the speed of light changed randomly, making navigation impossible and causing ships to arrive at destinations before they had actually left their starting points. The most terrifying zones were where entropy reversed, causing dead crew members to return to life just long enough to experience their deaths again in an endless cycle. Alien commanders who entered these regions broadcast desperate warnings to their fleets, describing spaces where cause and effect had been turned inside out, and where the basic assumptions of existence no longer applied. Michelle single quotes S reality weapons created permanent scars across the galaxy where physics had been fundamentally altered. These zones served as monuments to human power and warnings to any species that might consider challenging humanity in the future. Ships that accidentally entered distorted space regions were never seen again, though their final transmissions described impossible things happening to matter and energy. Dr. Jennifer Cole coordinated the biological warfare campaign from secure facilities on Earth. Jennifer's engineered viruses were spreading through Confederation space with deadly precision, targeting only the genetic markers of species that had participated in the genocide against human colonies. The diseases were masterpieces of synthetic biology that demonstrated humanity's complete understanding of alien physiology. The viruses lay dormant in infected populations for weeks before activating simultaneously across hundreds of worlds. Zephyrian military commanders found themselves dying slowly as their organs shut down one by one. The diseases caused maximum pain while avoiding immediate death, giving victims time to understand exactly what was happening to them and why. Jennifer had designed the biological weapons to be absolutely specific in their targeting civilian populations that had opposed the war against humanity remained completely healthy, forced to watch their military leaders die in agony while understanding that this was justice for genocide. The precision of the attacks sent a clear message that humanity could distinguish between guilty and innocent, even at the genetic level. Captain Daniel Murphy expanded the deployment of temporal displacement weapons throughout Confederation space. Daniel's squadron appeared without warning near enemy fleets and deployed devices that trapped entire crews in time loops, where they experienced their deaths over and over without ever actually dying. The psychological warfare effects were spreading through alien military forces as word of the temporal prisons reached every corner of the galaxy. The trapped crews broadcast their experiences across subspace communication networks, describing infinite cycles of death and resurrection that drove entire populations to madness. Zephyrian families received messages from loved ones who had been dead for months but were still somehow experiencing their final moments in endless repetition. Daniel's temporal weapons created a new category of military casualty that alien civilizations had no framework for understanding. The victims were neither alive nor dead, but trapped in a state of eternal dying that terrified every species in the Confederation. Military morale collapsed as soldiers realized that death in battle against humans might not bring the mercy of oblivion. The neutral alien species that had remained uninvolved in the conflict began receiving humanity's attention in ways they had never expected. President Catherine Lewis personally recorded messages that were broadcast to every civilization that had watched the genocide without intervening. Her words carried the weight of absolute authority, backed by demonstrated power. To those who stood aside while genocide was committed, Catherine's message began: "You chose complicity through your silence. Your neutrality enabled this Holocaust by giving the perpetrators confidence that no one would challenge their actions. You too must face consequences, though not extinction." Something far more educational. The neutral worlds found their communications networks infiltrated by quantum encrypted broadcasts that could not be blocked or filtered. Every screen, every communication device, every public display began showing recordings of the systematic murder of human civilians. The broadcast showed children dying in orbital bombardments, scientists watching their life's work burn, families torn apart by weapons designed for maximum cruelty. The psychological impact on neutral civilizations was immediate and devastating. Populations that had convinced themselves that the conflict was not their responsibility were forced to confront detailed evidence of their moral cowardice. The broadcasts continued for months, ensuring that every citizen of every neutral world understood exactly what they had allowed to happen through their inaction. Some neutral governments tried to block the transmissions, but human technology had infiltrated their quantum communication networks at the most fundamental level. The broadcasts could not be stopped because they were being transmitted through the same quantum entanglement. Fields that held matter together. Humanity had weaponized the basic forces of reality itself. The Confed-Dewell years after the first attack on human colonies, the galaxy had learned to fear the sound of human ships dropping out of hyperspace. Galactic Confederation no longer existed as a military force. Their fleets had been destroyed, their leaders were dead or trapped in temporal prisons, and their home worlds had been transformed into monuments to the consequences of genocide. Admiral Gary Thompson stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance as it entered orbit around Nexus Prime, the former capital of Confederation space. The massive artificial world that had once housed the council chambers where humanity's diplomatic pleas were dismissed now served a very different purpose. The cities and spires still stood, but they were empty of intelligent life and filled only with automated systems that broadcast humanity's final message to anyone who would listen. Gary had commanded human fleets through the darkest period in their species' history. He had watched colonies burn and seen millions of civilians murdered by aliens who considered humans to be nothing more than pests to be exterminated. Now he was overseeing the end of that phase of galactic history and the beginning of something entirely new. The surviving alien populations lived under human protection now, though protection was perhaps not the right word. Humanity had demonstrated their ability to destroy entire civilizations, but they had chosen instead to preserve them as examples of what happened when peaceful people were pushed beyond the point of tolerance. The galaxy would remember the lessons of this war for thousands of years. Dr. Laura Bennett had been appointed as Director of Galactic Relations, a position that would have been unimaginable before the war. Laura's job was to oversee the establishment of memorial archives on every former Confederation world, ensuring that the galaxy never forgot the price of their choice to support genocide. The memorial archives were quantum crystalline structures that contained the complete records of every human life lost in the alien attacks. Each archive held the names, faces, and stories of millions of people who had died simply because they wanted to build better lives among the stars. The archives could not be destroyed by any known technology, and they broadcast their contents continuously to ensure that future generations would understand what had happened. Lavra walked through the memorial complex on what had once been the Zephyrian capital world. The building was beautiful in its simplicity, with walls of pure crystal that displayed holographic images of human families who had lived and died on distant colonies. Children played in alien sunshine while their parents worked to terraform new worlds. Scientists made discoveries that could have benefited the entire galaxy. Farmers grew food that could have fed billions. All of those lives had been ended by the deliberate choice of alien leaders who saw humanity as inferior and unworthy of existence. The memorial archives made sure that everyone who visited these worlds understood exactly what had been lost when the Confederation chose genocide over cooperation. The surviving Zephyrians who lived near the memorial sites were not imprisoned or enslaved. Humanity had proven their moral superiority by providing aid and protection to civilian populations who had not participated in the attacks. But the aliens were also constantly reminded of what their leaders had chosen to do and what the consequences had been. Captain Elizabeth Morgan commanded the UES New Hope as it prepared for humanity's final departure from this sector of the galaxy. Elizabeth had been born on New Earth before its destruction, and she had lost friends and family in the alien attacks. But she also understood that staying in this region of space would only perpetuate the cycle of fear and hatred that had led to the war. Humanity had made their point with devastating clarity. They had demonstrated technologies that could reshape reality itself and shown that they could destroy any civilization that threatened them. But they had also shown restraint and mercy that their enemies had never offered. Now it was time to leave and find new frontiers among distant stars. The human exodus was not a retreat or an escape. It was a choice to seek out regions of space where they could build their civilization without the constant reminder of what they had been forced to become. Thousands of ships carried the survivors of the 17 colonies toward unexplored regions of the galaxy where they could start fresh. Elizabeth stood on the bridge of her ship and watched the last human vessels prepare for departure. The evacuation fleets carried not just people, but also the knowledge and technology that humanity had developed during their brief time as a galactic power. They were taking with them the secrets of stellar manipulation, reality warping, and biological warfare that had made them the most feared species in known space. The decision to leave was not made lightly. President Catherine Lewis had aged considerably during the war years, bearing the weight of decisions that had saved humanity, but also transformed them into something their ancestors might not recognize. Catherine understood that humanity needed time to process what they had become and to decide what kind of species they wanted to be going forward. The final message that humanity left for the galaxy was carved into the quantum structure of space itself, written in gravitational waves that would propagate across the universe for billions of years. The message was simple, but carried the weight of demonstrated power behind every word. Here lies a civilization that learned too late that when humanity says you have been warned, those words carry the weight of extinction itself. We came to you with friendship and left you with wisdom. We offered cooperation and received genocide. We extended our hand in peace and were forced to close it in war. The message continued with words that would be remembered long after the stars themselves had burned out. You chose to see us as primitive and weak because we valued life over conquest. You interpreted our desire for peace as inability to wage war. You believed that advanced technology automatically granted moral superiority. All of these assumptions were wrong. The galaxy would remember that humanity had possessed the power to exterminate every alien species that had wronged them, but had chosen instead to educate them about the consequences of their actions. Human weapons could have turned entire star systems into lifeless void, but they had targeted only those directly responsible for genocide, while protecting innocent civilians. Dr. Amanda Foster made the final transmission from her Antarctic laboratory before the quantum communication networks were shut down. Amanda had been the architect of Protocol Omega, the secret program that had unleashed humanity's true capabilities upon an unsuspecting galaxy. Her words carried the authority of someone who had seen the darkest depths of what her species could accomplish when pushed to desperation. Let this be understood by any civilization that might encounter humanity in the future. Amanda said as her message was broadcast across subspace, "We are not conquerors or destroyers by nature. We are builders and explorers who seek knowledge and friendship among the stars. But we have learned that the universe contains species who mistake kindness for weakness and see compassion as an invitation for exploitation." Amanda continued with words that would become part of galactic legend. When such species threaten our existence, we become something else entirely. We become the storm that reshapes worlds, the force that rewrites the laws of physics, the nightmare that haunts civilizations for millennia. We hope never to become that again, but the choice is not entirely ours to make. The final ships of the human Exodus fleet activated their hyperdrive systems and disappeared into the void between galaxies, leaving behind only empty space and the automated systems that would continue broadcasting their message until the heat death of the universe. The memorial archives on former Confederation worlds would ensure that no future species would repeat the mistake of underestimating humanity or confusing their peaceful nature with inability to wage total war. The aliens who remained in Confederation space faced a future shaped by the knowledge of what they had brought upon themselves. Their military forces had been permanently disbanded, their weapons technology had been destroyed, and their governments had been reformed under human oversight. They were not slaves or subjects, but rather students in a harsh lesson about the consequences of choosing genocide over diplomacy. The Zephyrians, who had once proudly ruled the galaxy, now worked to rebuild their civilization under the shadow of human monuments that reminded them daily of their leader's fatal arrogance. The Vorthan crystal beings struggled to reconstruct their shattered computational matrices while processing the reality that their advanced intellects had failed to predict the consequences of their actions. The neutral species that had watched the genocide without intervening faced their own forms of education. Their communications networks continued to broadcast recordings of human suffering, ensuring that future generations would understand the price of moral cowardice. They were not destroyed or conquered, but they were changed forever by the knowledge of their complicity. As the last human ship disappeared into hyperspace, the galaxy settled into a new era of peace, enforced not by treaty or alliance, but by the memory of what had happened when peaceful people were pushed beyond the edge of tolerance. The empty spaces where human colonies had